Welcome back to the Dirt Show. Before we turn to Harvard and universities and Trump policies, I want to spend a few minutes talking about President Biden getting prostate cancer. It now turns out, at least according to his spokespeople, that he hasn't had a PSA test since 2014, which means he didn't have a PSA test when he was running for president of the United States. It's just unbelievable. The man's running for president. He is in his 70s and he's not being tested for prostate cancer. It's not as if the test is so difficult. It just requires blood. You can have it as part when you give blood. Everybody gives blood to be tested for cholesterol, for whatever, and then for another $100, you get your PSA tested. It's all covered by insurance. But even if you don't have insurance, at $100, $120, it used to be even less. Back in 2014, it was probably $25. The idea that his doctors would not say to the testing lab, to Quest or whatever the testing lab is, oh, by the way, do a PSA test. And, of course, having your prostate examined is not the most fun in the world. It's probably even less fun for the doctor who has to do it. And but you do it. So somebody, makes you uncomfortable for 30 seconds. And, I'm 86. I assume I'm still having my PSA tested. I just actually had blood drawn the other day for my cholesterol and other things. I assume that part of the standard testing is PSA. I know that the medical profession now says, well, if you're over 70, you shouldn't get the PSA tested. That is stupid. They do it to save money, but this saving $100, that's ridiculous. If even one preventable cancer is discovered, that's more than justifying it. I can't stand the kind of public medicine that people practicing. Well, statistically, if you're over 70, if you get prostate cancer, it's likely to be slow growing, so you're not going to die from the cancer. You're going to die with the cancer. So we're not going to do the PSA test. No, do the damn PSA test. I have a client who I don't remember, was in his 50s. He went to prison. And they wouldn't allow him to have a PSA test. In those days, it was $50, and he was a billionaire. They wouldn't let him have the PSA test. And the day he got out, he had the PSA test, and he had very, very serious prostate cancer. He survived, but remarkably. So the notion that a man running for president of the United States, for leader of the free world, who's having his blood tested, is having medical checkups all the time, doesn't check for prostate cancer. I have to tell you, there's only two possibilities. Number one, malpractice, which you always assume is the answer. Stupidity is usually to be preferred over venality. But, the other is a cover-up. The other is that they were afraid that if they did a test that might find something that would make it harder for him to be elected. Apparently, he did have a tumor, a benign tumor, even previously, and I'm sure there are other symptoms, and he's had cancer in his family. The idea that he didn't get tested, if it's true that for the years before he ran for president, as he was running for president, he didn't have a PSA test. If that's true, it is a scandal without justification. And whoever his doctors are, boy, I sure as hell wouldn't want to go to a doctor like that, who wanted to save $100 by not having a test, because statistically, maybe if you're over 70 and if you get cancer, it's slow growing and it won't kill you. That's not the kind of medicine I want practiced on me. I have, a lot of family who are doctors. I don't know what their procedures are, but I have to tell you, I'm going to tell my doctors immediately, I want PSA testing until the day I die. If they have me in the hospital and they're putting me on, terminal care, and it says do not resuscitate, I'm still going to have a PSA test just in case, because it costs nothing. And it has false positives, of course, and you can do further testing to avoid, surgery if you have a PSA, a high PSA. And I've had friends who have had high PSAs, and they've had the surgery, and they've been fine. I've had other friends, two friends, who didn't catch it, and both of them suffered greatly from having prostate cancer. And by the way, having prostate cancer is not only risk of death, it's also obviously a risk of impotence and other kinds of considerations. And so, for anybody, just when your doctor takes your blood, just tell them, do a PSA, please. Do a PSA, please. Don't listen to the statistics. It's me. I want you to do a PSA. And if you're running for president, you definitely should have a PSA. And if you're in the White House and you're being screened for every conceivable illness, include the PSA. It's such an easy test. You don't even have to give extra blood for it. It's just part of the blood test. So I am furious at Biden's doctors. I like Joe Biden very much. I've known him since 1980. Whatever you might think of his politics, whatever you might think of anything else, he's a nice man. And he's gone through hell. And he's had so many losses in his family. And now he's not going to have a decent retirement. He's going to have to be treated because this has become an aggressive cancer. It's metastasized to his bones. And I just feel terrible for him and unforgiving to his doctors. Okay. So you can call me and write to me about that, disagree with me, whatever. In any event, let's turn to the subject at hand. Trump to Harvard. Go fund yourself. Again, just today again, Trump administration has cut off another, I think, $500 million worth of grants to Harvard. Just want to make sure that these cutting off of grants and funding is targeted. It shouldn't be cutting off research grants for curing prostate cancer or curing heart disease or curing other illnesses. Those research grants should be allowed to go forward as long as they're done non-politically. Now, if somebody comes in and says, I want a grant to try to cure cancer, and I'm only going to hire people who are fit the criteria of DEI, I say, no, I'm going to give the grant to meritocracy people. I'm going to give the grant to people who pick researchers based on their ability to cure cancer, not on their ability to cure social problems in society. So even medical research, obviously can be affected by DEI, intersectionality, Black, this and that, and race. What's it called? Critical race theory. All of this nonsense that we're seeing that are destroying colleges and universities. The question I get asked all the time, I get asked people on the street, spoke last night, people ask me all the time, would you send your kid to Harvard today? Well, I've answered that question. I had no input on it, but both of my grandchildren went to Harvard, where they did extremely, extremely well, and then went on to medical school. So I didn't have any input on those decisions. My children, their parents did. Probably they didn't have much input. The kids themselves made the decision. Obviously, parents made the decision to send them to good high schools, which helped them get into Harvard. But they, both got into Harvard and many other schools, and they picked Harvard. And my answer is it depends on the kid. If your kid is like my grandkids and my kids, tough and thick-skinned and are willing to fight back, yeah, send them to Harvard. Send them into battle. Tell them to stand up to their professors and their peers. They may get lower grades as the result of it, but many schools now have an honors grading, so that they won't even suffer from that. But maybe they'll lose friends, maybe they'll be emotionally challenged, but I want my kids and my grandkids to get the best education they possibly can get. Now, the question is, does Harvard give you the best education? My answer is no, I don't think so. I think today, Washington University in St. Louis is a better education than undergraduate Harvard. I think schools like Vanderbilt, Emory, are at least as good, certainly better than Columbia, in my view, and many other schools. So I wouldn't judge the quality of a school by whether it's an Ivy League school. By the way, the very meaning of Ivy League, people don't even know what it is. People think it's because Ivy was grown. It's because Ivy Leagues and athletically are Division Four, and Division Four is IV in Roman, IV. So that's the origin of Ivy League schools. Nothing special about Ivy League schools. Cornell is, not any better than the University of Florida. And there are comparable schools that are not Ivy League schools. But I would send my kid to the school that most suited their talents and their needs and their abilities. And uh, Harvard is certainly one of them. My daughter went to Yale. My son went to Penn. I went to Brooklyn College. I couldn't afford to go to a paying school. I went to a free school, which at the time there was no political indoctrination. I had professors from all schools of life. I had the man who ultimately became the head of the Libertarian Party, conservative. I had, uh, Justice Scalia's father was a professor at Brooklyn College, and we had left-wing people, right-wing people, centrist people. But I don't remember my professors telling me what to think. I remember my professors challenging me. So I would make sure that whoever was asking me advice would go to the school that best suited their talents and their needs and their abilities, and I would not exclude Harvard. So now the question is, Trump and Harvard seem to be in an absolute deadlock. Trump is increasing the pressures, as I said just yesterday and today. They cut more funding from Harvard. They're trying to get their tax exemption taken away. I know from personal view that Harvard is redoubling its efforts to try to get alumni contributions to make up for it. Harvard Law School just discovered something in the library that profited them about $100 million. They're not going to sell it, but they found an original copy of the Magna Carta that nobody knew existed. They paid $27 for it. And that's probably worth about $100 million if it ever went up at auction. It's not going to go up at auction. Obviously, there are 8 copies in the world. I don't know how many of them still exist and how many of them are in private or university hands, etc. I'm a collector. It's the dream of every collector to find a copy of the Magna Carta, of the Declaration of Independence. I have a very early copy of the Declaration of Independence, which I treasure. And I have early copies of a lot of important documents, very early copy of the Bill of Rights, very early copy of the Constitution. So I'm very happy with my collection. But Magna Carta, that's beyond it. I was at the 750th anniversary of Magna Carta. I was Harvard Law School's official representative, went to Westminster, sat 4 or 5 rows behind the Queen, saw the actual copy of the Magna Carta that was held up and exhibited. It wasn't passed around. I didn't touch it. But there I was in Westminster Abbey celebrating the 750th anniversary of that great Declaration of Freedom, which really is the origin of the writ of habeas corpus and all of those things, some of which the Trump administration is now trying to suspend. It won't be able to. Don't worry about it. The writ of habeas corpus can't be suspended except by Congress and except during wartime. So I think the writ of habeas corpus is fairly safe. But is Harvard safe? And I don't know the answer to that question. Harvard will survive because it has a $53 billion endowment. It has very good money managers who make around 10% tax-free for the most part. So if you're making 10% of $54 billion endowment, you're making over $5 billion a year. They're taxed at a very low rate. They agree to pay certain taxes, but probably 10% or something. So, they can put in the bank $5 billion a year, which is more than any university needs to support it for any given year. So I'm not shedding too many tears about Harvard. I am shedding tears about the research that has stopped as the result of cutting off the funds from medical research, and that ought to stop. That ought to stop. They shouldn't be cutting off of funding. There are plans that say, well, maybe all university funding should be cut, and anybody who wants a research grant should have to go to the National Association of this or that, and national academies of who do pure scientific evaluations, not political evaluations, and get their research grants from that. That would be very cumbersome and difficult and expensive. But I would hope that universities should be subjected to targeted funding. There are a lot of aspects of Harvard that shouldn't be funded. The Harvard Divinity School has become a cesspool of bigotry and anti-Semitism. The Divinity School, it's supposed to teach Christian values. Basically, to be on the faculty of the Harvard Divinity School, you have to be a non-Christian, certainly in your attitudes. The anti-Semitism that has been spewing forward from the Divinity School, and this doesn't come from me, that comes from this Harvard. Harvard did its own study of its own schools, and it came to the conclusion, Harvard came to the conclusion, that the Divinity School is a cesspool. It also came to the conclusion that the School of Public Health is a cesspool of anti-Semitism. Those are the two schools that are the worst. And there are programs at the schools, the human rights programs at the law school is a cesspool of bigotry and anti-Semitism. I used to call myself a human rights, civil liberties activist. Those were my bywords. I never use those words anymore. Today, human rights, civil liberties have all become weaponized words to be used against America, Christianity, Judaism, Israel, Zionism. If you hear the word human rights, you know it's going to be anti-Israel. If you hear the word civil rights, you know it's going to claim apartheid, civil liberties. Those words have been hijacked horribly. And I feel myself just personally deprived because I've devoted my life to human rights, civil liberties, and I don't use those words anymore. When I see an envelope coming in now that is an attempt to get me to contribute, and it says human rights, I tear it up. It says civil liberties, I throw it in the garbage pail. I don't support the American Civil Liberties Union. I don't support organizations that claim to be civil rights organizations. I marched for civil rights in the 1950s and the 1960s. I got into trouble when I was president of the student government at Brooklyn College. I was rebuked. The president of the school wouldn't write me a recommendation for law school because I participated in civil rights demonstrations. I was there when Martin Luther King made his speech, I Have a Dream speech. So, for me, civil rights was always the essence of my life. Civil liberties, no more. I despise organizations that claim to be in favor of and human rights. The Human Rights Project, which is now, a gay project, has become an anti-Israel project. Transgender rights. You can't support transgender rights unless you support Palestinian claims that there should be no Israel state. So what's gone on in the world today, this inversion of Hamas is suddenly the great civil rights organization, and Israel is an apartheid, genocidal, etc. And the United States is too. And so, don't count me as a supporter of civil rights, civil liberties, human rights. I support those concepts, but I don't support organizations. I support gay rights. I do not support gay rights organizations. I support Black Lives Matter. I do not support Black Lives Matter as an organization. I support transgender rights. I do not support transgender organizations for the most part because they have become part of intersectionality, and you can't support them unless you become an anti-Semite, an anti-Israel, anti-American, anti-Christian. That's the world we're moving into, and it's just awful. And it inverts everything. And today, when somebody says, I support civil liberties, civil rights, human rights, I look at them very, very suspiciously. What kind of a fascist are you if you support that? It must mean, that you hate this and hate that. So we don't even have a common vocabulary anymore. That's how divided we've become. All right. So I'm hoping that the administration continues to put pressure on Harvard and other schools to end its toleration of bigotry. And I will support the administration as long as it doesn't cut back on research grants, pure scientific and medical research. So again, I feel very, politically homeless. I'm not on Harvard's side. I'm not on the administration side because the administration is going too far. Harvard isn't doing enough. I try my best to think for myself, and many of you in your letters support that. Some of you don't, because even in your letters, some of you, if I'm not with you 100%, then I'm an evil person. I got a number of letters that make me an evil person because I don't support completely everything they say. Dersh, you are a fool. Yeah, yeah. So, ad hominems. Don't see you or any of your family in the military, Alan. Pretty easy when someone else does your dirty work for you. Let me tell you, I have lost people in the military. Two of my uncles, one of them won medals and retired as a major, fought in the Second World War. Another uncle was on the verge of D-Day, and he wasn't picked for the group. He was in England getting ready to perform on D-Day. So don't condemn me. I grew up at an age where I wasn't drafted. I didn't resist the draft. I was between wars. If I had been drafted, I would have fought. I would have fought patriotically. But I didn't grow up at a time when the draft covered me. But it would have. If it would have, I would have fought. So let's look at some of these letters. Very strange to hear you propose violence as a solution. It's out of character. No, it's not. If you need to use violence to stop worse violence, it's not out of character. You've heard me say over and over again that I wish France and England had invaded Nazi Germany in 1935, killed Hitler, Goering, and Goebbels, and Himmler, and all those guys, and ended Nazism. It would have saved 50 million lives in the Second World War. Perhaps at a cost of 10 million lives. So no, I'm in favor of violence when violence is necessary to prevent even greater violence. And next letter relates to that too. The airstrike, talking about the airstrike that killed Mohammed Sinwar and perhaps as many as a dozen other terrorist leaders in Gaza. The airstrike resulted in the death of at least 28 individuals and injured over 40 others, according to Gaza's Civil Defense and Health Ministry. Of course, we don't know how many were Hamas fighters. Even the letter itself says that among the casualties were both Hamas militants and civilians who were present in the hospital vicinity. And then the letter goes on to criticize me for justifying the attack on the hospital. I would do it again every single time. It was exactly the right thing to do. It was just under international law. The people who are responsible for the death of every single person in that hospital were the Hamas commandos who were hiding in the hospital. It's against international law for militants, for terrorists, for fighters, for people in the army to hide in a civilian hospital or a civilian school. And those who hide in those schools are the ones who are responsible for the deaths. The Israeli army did exactly the right thing. They should do it again and again and again, even if it resulted in 28 people being killed, even if half of them were civilians. Civilian deaths, collateral deaths, are a consequence of going after militant leaders. And remember what the definition of proportionality is. Under international law, the definition of proportionality is you have to evaluate the value of the military target. What could be more valuable than the head of Hamas, the head of its military wing, and anywhere up to a dozen other commanders and leaders? That is the most high value target imaginable. And if it takes killing 28 or 14 innocent people to kill that dozen, under international law, that's a trade-off that's justified. The most important thing is the responsibility for every single death is with the terrorists, the commanders, the violent people, the militants, the soldiers who are using civilians as human shields, who are hiding among civilians. So let's understand that. Okay, another question along the same line. What gives the United States government the right to decide who can and cannot have nukes? Self-defense. Any country has the right to decide that its enemies can't have nukes. And if they can't convince them of it, they're entitled to preventively destroy those nukes. Read my book, The Preventive State. It's now been published, just been published. And in it, I go through the whole analysis of when it's appropriate for one state to take preventive action to prevent an enemy state from developing nuclear weapons. Remember, when it comes to Israel, Israel's had nuclear weapons since at least the 1960s. They've never used them, and they would never use them except defensively to prevent their country from being destroyed. There were some people who advocated it in 1973, and they didn't use it, even though they were really in danger of being destroyed. But Iran has said if they develop nuclear weapons, they will use it. They will bomb Tel Aviv. They will kill 3 million Jews. They said that Israel is a one-bomb state, and if they drop the one bomb on Tel Aviv, it would be the end of Israel. So that's what gives you the right of self-defense, the right to say, I'm not going to let another Holocaust occur. If the Jews had a nuclear bomb in 1940 and they used it to prevent Nazi Germany from building death camps and crematorium, of course it would have been justified. Unfortunately, there was no Israel because England prevented Jews from going to what was then called Palestine, a term given to Judea by the Romans in order to deny the Jewishness of what became Israel. All right, another letter along the same lines. Nobody outside of your own little bubble gives two figs about the Iranian nuclear effort. I just don't think that's right. Israel has the bomb, so why should Iran not have it? Because Israel's not going to use it, and Iran would. So what do you think of the famine imposed on Gaza people and 60,000 dead? Not a single person has died of starvation in Gaza. There is no famine. It's a total and complete fabrication. The people of Gaza have been denied dessert. They have appetizers and they have main dishes. You go, you see the pictures of all the stalls with fresh fruit and fresh food, and now Israel is providing food and medication as long as it doesn't get to Hamas. By the way, which other country in the world has ever been compelled to feed its enemies? It's never happened in the history of the world. When we had a siege of Berlin, a siege of Tokyo, we didn't feed them. Obviously, when there have been other sieges, that's part of it. But Israel has always provided food, and nobody, as far as I know, not a single person, has died of starvation. We've heard since October 7th, oh, they're starving. They've been crying wolf. It's a fake. Nobody is dying of starvation. Israel has been, as I said, denying them dessert. But they're getting appetizers and they're getting main dishes and they're getting all the food they need to live. And now Israel's giving them more food as long as it doesn't get to Hamas. To the extent people of Gaza were being denied food, it was because the food was being taken by Hamas and being used to support terrorists who were killing Israelis and killing Jews. Here's a different point of view. Israel must destroy Hamas as a deterrent. All of Israel's mortal enemies must know that any organization that perpetuates this type of inhumane attack, October 7th, will not survive. I agree with that. I think that it's a very important point to send out, and to send it to the Houthis, to send it to Hezbollah, to send it to Iran, that you will be destroyed if you try to destroy Israel. The Bible itself says in the book of Psalms, God will give the Jewish people strength, and only then will they have peace. The only way Jews have ever, ever, ever had peace is through strength. And that's why I support a strong Israel. I support American support for Israel. Israel has never asked for boots on the ground. It's asked only for tactical, logistical, diplomatic help, and it's entitled to it. Israel has always wanted only peace. It offered two states in 1938, 1948, 1967, 2000, 2001, 2005, 2007. Palestinian leadership has constantly turned it down because it doesn't want a two-state solution. It wants either a one-state solution, only Palestine, or a no-state solution, as long as there isn't Israel. But there isn't a single demonstrator on a single college campus that has ever called for a solution that would result in the survival of Israel as the nation state of the Jewish people. Bear that in mind. See you tomorrow.